Today we are going to talk about Be Formless, Be Shapeless, Be Agile. That book club sounds really exciting. May have to drop in there sometime. So, a little bit about myself. I'm an Agile transformation slash business agility coach. Um, I have worked at several Fortune 100 companies such as Caterpillar, Prudential, Pfizer, Boston Consulting, and Fidelity. I have my own consulting company, Envision Consulting, as you can see all over. And as you can see, I didn't think my last name was difficult enough, so I decided to add a few more letters after it. Just certified in Scrum, Safe, Kanban, DevOps, etc. Also, something I'm extremely proud of. I'm a proud member of the John Maxwell team. I'm a certified leadership coach, trainer, speaker, and DISC behavioral analysis trainer. All right, so what are we going to do today? We are going to talk a little bit about my martial arts philosophy and how that ties into what I do professionally. Um, and then we're going to go a little bit over some of the frameworks, okay? And then I'm going to go through some real life practical case studies that I've actually been through. And then from there, just talk about any PDU opportunities or anything like that. Although it sounds like you guys have a really great program here with PMI and with PMI DC here, and lots of cicadas. So, all right, we are going to get going here. Okay, so my parents came over here from the U.S., came over here to the U.S. from the Philippines. And so I grew up in a very traditional Filipino household. I actually was living in a very homogenized area. Um, there weren't a ton of minorities where I lived, and so therefore, um, growing up with one culture and then going to school and everywhere else I went was a completely different culture. I didn't know a lot of the lay of the land and even like humor and jokes and things like that. I was very unsure of, and because of that, I was bullied quite a bit. And as you can tell by this picture, why I was bullied so much. Um, but so yes, I was bullied quite a bit, and what I did a lot to find inspiration on Saturday mornings, I watched a lot of Bruce Lee movies. I watched a lot of martial arts movies. I was just very, very much into the martial arts, and just um, Bruce Lee had a saying. He said, "You must be formless and shapeless like water." Now, why did he say that? He had studied many martial arts from all over the world, not just Asian martial arts, but also Europe, etc., and things like that. Um, and what he found was he found that a lot of systems had become overly rigid, thereby rendering them ineffective. He believed that one needed to be able to adapt to the very dynamic and fluid nature of combat in order to deal with many different types of situations. So he inspired me and countless other generations to pursue martial arts. I've studied many different arts, and I'll go over some of that. And why is that important? Why would I share that at lunchtime at a PMI event? Well, quite frankly, what I want to do is I want to talk about how I've used this philosophy: be formless, be shapeless, be agile, as an agile transformation coach. I want to talk about how we could be formless like water and how we can thrive and adapt to this ever changing world in business and life. Now, when we're talking about agile, there's so many different things out there, right? But the definition of agile, according to Webster, is that it's having a quick, resourceful, and adaptable character. A quick, resourceful, and adaptable character, an agile mind. Now, this is one study, but you can take a look at many others. But according to this study, the number one benefit for adopting Agile is the ability to manage changing priorities. And again, there's all kind of studies out there, but generally they're going to say very similar things here, is that the whole point, the reason why people want to adopt Agile, the reason why companies want to adopt Agile is to deal with this ever-changing world. Now, this is a slide from Ahmed Sikni of IC Agile, Everywhere I Talk. I always use this. Basically, what this slide says is this: Agile is really a mindset, and it's described by 4 values defined by 12 principles and manifested in a ton of practices, right? So you've got all the way on the left a mindset, and then values, principles, and practices. Now, there are a ton of practices, unlike the PMBOK, the Project Management Body of Knowledge, who literally wrote the book on waterfall, or they're starting to call it predictive now. There is no one safe source of Agile. And if anyone tells you different, they're lying, okay? There is no one safe source in terms of practices because there are a bazillion practices, and then any collection of practices is a framework. Okay? And so the problem is that if we focus only on practices and frameworks, we become extremely rigid, and what ends up happening is we can become very ineffective, right? Bruce Lee said that there is the classical mess. It's just a bundle of routine, ideas, and tradition. When they or people act, they are translating every living moment in terms of the old. Okay, well, Gary Hamel kind of builds on this thought, and he says that Gary Hamel, by the way, is a professor at London School of Business, one of the most reprinted authors in the Harvard Business Review. He basically says that most of our management practices, most of the management practices that we have were created by people who were born towards the end of the Civil War. So think about that. Think about how a lot of our organizations are designed, and regardless of what industry, and you see a lot of bureaucracy, you see a lot of over process, and just it makes it very difficult. As an agile transformation coach, this is usually what I see, and I have to come in to help them streamline things so that they can adapt. Now, in the in the years ago, people, and this has been happening for centuries, but it really got popular a couple decades ago. There was this big push to see which martial art was the best, right? So everyone would say, is this art kung fu, karate, taekwondo, boxing, kickboxing, wrestling, all these different arts? Which one is the best, right? And there would always be debates, and sometimes there would be fights break out and things like that. And the funny thing is that when I came into the Agile community, that's kind of what a lot of LinkedIn blogs and posts are like regarding Agile. Some people feel one framework is the best framework in the world. Another one feels like it is absolutely horrible, an abomination. And then other people feel like another one is better. And it's just amazing to me how segregated, how many differing opinions and thoughts there are regarding Agile. And sometimes I actually just read a blog post last week that was quite honestly very hostile. People get really, 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 did I say really? Really hung up about certain practices and things like that. However, one thing my mentor once taught me was that if the only tool you have is a hammer, then you tend to see every problem as a nail. So what happens is this: if you only know a framework, if you only know waterfall, you only know Scrum, only know Kanban, only know, pick whatever framework, pick whatever methodology, doesn't matter. If that's all you know, then every time you look at a problem, you're going to assume that framework, that methodology, that process is going to be the answer. However, Albert Einstein said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about solutions. We want to have a very solution-based approach. In order to have a solution-based approach, you got to ask, what problem are we trying to solve? My first Agile mentor, if there's anything that he taught me, was this: what problem are we trying to solve? Niel, don't just go in there, guns blazing with the framework. Figure out what that group, what that organization, what are they trying to accomplish? What is the problem they are trying to solve for? And then come up with practices, right? One way to ask this is, what business outcomes are we trying to achieve? What business outcomes are we trying to achieve? I was working with the senior vice president who was working on a huge enterprise-wide. It's probably bigger than enterprise. It's really dealing with a lot of societal paradigms. And my first meeting with her and her chief of staff were there, and they came in, and he didn't look like super happy to be meeting me. Okay. And so she's like, okay, here's our agile stuff. This is what we're doing. Da, da, da. And I just listened. I said, okay. I said, can I ask you something? And she goes, okay. I said, before we get into all these agile practices that you're doing, can I ask you, what is it that you're trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? What problem are we trying to solve? And then let's figure out what practices we should do. She took one look at me and was like, you serious? I'm like, yeah. She's like, you are a breath of fresh air. I was like, what are you talking about? She goes, everybody else that we've had in there kept trying to force me to do all these things. And oh my God. And so we probably spent most of the meeting talking about all the different ways different rigid agile people had come in before me. And you know, the bad thing is that, you know, there was a certain reputation that this group had. And when I came and found out, it was just that it wasn't that they were bad people. It's just that they had some unique circumstances, and we had to come up with a unique way to be able to deal with them. So, and now her and I are great, and you know, she didn't want anything to do with Agile. Not only does she have me work with her group, we're bringing other people in, like Scrum Masters and other folks in there, to help her become more agile in her group. So, what am I getting at? Well, Bruce Lee said it like this. He said, now you put water in a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it into a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now, water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend. What's he saying? Well, we want to be formless and shapeless like water. See, the thing is, with all these different martial arts and everybody was trying to figure out which style was best, what they've come to realize is that it depends on the situation. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. And what they've realized now, again, this is why the UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championship, cage fighting, or MMA, mixed martial arts, has become so popular, is that instead of trying to say one art is superior, it's like you have to realize, oh, okay, if I cover a bunch of different things, I can deal with a bunch of different situations. So let me give you a few examples. All right, you see this gentleman here with the black and blue on, right? He had been studying traditional Okinawan karate ever since he was a baby. And as you can see here, we are sparring, and he is putting his foot into my solar plexus and my ribs, and the side of my body here was black and blue. So you can see the wind getting knocked out of me here. All right, you see this gentleman. He holds numerous black belts. He's also fought professional MMA. He was undefeated. And as you can see here, the top of his foot is actually almost pointing towards the ceiling here, right? And we know from high school science that what comes up must come down. In this case, on my head. All right? And here is my boxing coach. You can't see it here, but I am like almost begging for an oxygen tank because I'm about to pass out. Um, so he was giving me a tremendous workout. If you've never ever punched boxing mitts, I recommend you do it. Tremendous workout. I'm always gassed every time I do it. Now, the thing is, whether it was boxing or sport karate, kickboxing, you know, the last few slides I've showed you, even though those are, you know, high impact kind of sports, they have rules. Okay, they have rules. Now here, I'm learning from a world-renowned self-defense expert about self-protection, or street fighting, if you will. There are no rules. So as you see here, with one hand, he's choking me. The other hand, he's hitting me with an elbow up right around here, right? And again, I'm about ready to pass out. Now, the thing is, with the street fighting, with the other sports and stuff, even though here in street fighting there are no rules, you use certain techniques. Why? Because we're standing. Well, what happens if you can't stand anymore? Well, you see here, my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coach is throwing me like a rag doll, and I'm landing square on my back on the ground. Now, everything I just learned, whether it was in karate, sport karate, kickboxing, boxing, etc., or even street fighting, I have to throw all of that out the window, because all of that changes once the fight hits the ground, and you can no longer stand on your feet. You're on the ground. Your punches, your kicks, all of that no longer is effective. So, what am I getting at? Well, what I'm getting at is that to be a true martial artist, I had to learn a bunch of different contexts. I had to learn a bunch of different situations to be able to deal with a variety of contexts, right? See, we always say in the martial arts that we want to have a white belt mentality. I have a third-degree black belt in karate. I started training karate when I was a teenager. That was just a few short years ago. But anyway, point being is you have to have a white belt mentality. You always have to be in a posture to be learning. You never want to get into a place where you figure things out. Why? Because Confucius, he talked about this. He said, if you are the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Oh, and by the way, martial arts is very much a family affair. As you can see here, here are my boys. They are well versed in the Power Ranger slash Teenage Mutant Ninja style. And my wife loves it when we practice Brazilian Jiu Jitsu in the family room. So, anyway, my point is this: we wanted to be cross functional. We want to develop T shaped skills. This is very popular in the Agile community, especially in regards to developers. So in other words, you want to have people normally. Normally, what happens is you think of, let's say somebody knows Python. Well, we want them to train in Java, or let's say somebody's front end where they know React and Angular, things like that. But we want to have them learn how to do middleware, backend, APIs, all these different things. Basically, the point is you want people to be cross-functional. We're going to have a depth of experience, right? We'll all have something that we're strong in. That's this part, right? This vertical axis. We're all going to have a depth, but we want to be able to also be broad in our skills. We want to make sure that we are developing ourselves so we can be more versatile. That'll help us deal with a variety of contexts. And trust me when I tell you this, that will also make you more marketable. Marketable if you're looking for a different job, or marketable within your own organization. All right? So now, I want to go over some different frameworks. Just like there's different martial arts styles, there's all kind of different frameworks in Agile. This is just going to be a very short, very quick, brief 30,000-foot view just to give you guys an idea. All right, Scrum. Scrum is probably the most ubiquitous framework out there. It's used by anywhere from 70 to 85% of companies, depending on which study you look at. Why do we use Scrum? First of all, it's used for very iterative development. When you need fast feedback, you have those little time boxes called sprints or iterations. And essentially, at the end of each iteration or sprint, you're getting a lot of feedback. It's very collaborative, right? And to me, the genius of Scrum is in its simplicity. The genius of Scrum is in how simple it is. Even though it's super simple, one book that I do recommend, Dominic, is this book, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time by Jeff Sutherland. I think it's a phenomenal book because you see all the depth of understanding and thought that he has in creating something so simple. It is really, really a great book. I recommend every Agilist, even if you don't do Scrum or don't like Scrum or whatever, at least take a look at it and just understand it, right? Then we have extreme programming practices, right? Now, this is where we get a lot of coding practices, things like you have things like collective code ownership, small releases, pair programming, test first, right? All kind of things like that. These are a lot of your engineering, software engineering kind of practices. Then we have Kanban, right? Kanban is for flow-based work. This is good for incremental change. The theory of Kanban is that just let's figure out what your process steps are, and then let's create this board that we can help visualize the work of your process steps. And then let's measure things like cycle time, lead time, and let's see where the bottlenecks are, and let's make some incremental changes, right? I like using this for things like maybe if you're dealing with an infrastructure team, non-IT teams, for things that are very repetitive. They're doing the same thing, just with different bodies of work. They're going to do the same 5, 10 steps, whatever it is. It's almost like a ticketing system. I think Kanban is great for that. And by the way, where Kanban came from was this place called the Piggly Wiggly. Well, what do you mean? Well, several folks from Japan came over to look at the manufacturing plants over in the US. And they were really disappointed because they saw a lot of waste in the plants. Then they were hungry, so they went to a store called the Piggly Wiggly. And no joke, they went over to the store called the Piggly Wiggly and they noticed that they only put just enough inventory out on the shelves for consumers to get, and then they would restock them. So they didn't have all their inventory out there. They would just put just enough, like 4 or 5, whatever it was, to pull. And this became the fundamental principle for lean, just in time, right? And in order for people to understand what they were doing around the manufacturing plant, they put these signal cards, which in Japanese is called a Kanban. So that's where Kanban came from, the Piggly Wiggly. All right. Speaking of lean, Kanban is one of the things from lean. Lean, basically what lean promotes is identify customers and specify value. You have no idea how difficult that can be. I'm working with a bunch of vice presidents right now to help understand this, and it's a lot harder than it sounds. And then once we do that, we identify and map the value stream. How does value flow through an organization from the time somebody makes an order unto a time that we can ring the cash register? And then what we do is we find the bottlenecks, we find the waste, and then from there we try to eliminate those, and then we try to create more demand, right? In order to have on-demand systems, you've got to make sure your processes are very clean and that you can do things in your time to market can be very fast, right? And then you want to pursue perfection or constantly get better at what you do. All right. A lot of Agile stuff focuses in at the team level, so we had to figure out a way to scale. So there's a lot of scaling frameworks out there. These are the 3 that I am most familiar with: Safe, Scrum at Scale, and Spotify. All right, so with that said, I want to jump into some case studies. I'm going to go through this, and I'm going to have some time for questions here. But here are some case studies. Number 1. I was working with the group because they had an idea to create a mobile app using technology that was new to our enterprise. This was several years ago. And that technology was virtual reality. This is way before Pokemon. This is way before that one TV show or that one movie, Ready Player One, right? So chose Scrum because of the collaboration, the iteration. We needed a lot of fast feedback, and they were co-located, so Scrum worked great. Again, this is way, way, way before COVID. Something we did that was very unique here, we did 1-week sprints. The reason why we did 1-week sprints is because we really needed to get a lot of fast feedback. It was literally experimenting. They would like come up with something and say, hey, what do you think of this? Oh, let's try it. Oh, okay, right? They would literally try something and then they would give feedback on it, make changes. So, I mean, a week was almost not fast enough because they were constantly experimenting. And so I don't recommend 1 week that often, but for this group, it worked well because they were constantly trying to get that feedback. So what happened? Well, they were a finalist for the Chairman's Award for Innovation at the company we were at, as well as NASA actually inquired about this project. So, all right, the second one. I was dealing with a group that their quality was horrible. I mean, it was absolutely horrible. We would plan the sprint and then we would go, and then like 2 or 3 days into the sprint, they had to stop and fix all their production issues because they messed everything up. And then it was constantly back and forth. And not to mention, they had a very toxic team dynamic. Everyone was always arguing. I mean, people were arguing with the tech lead. The tech lead was arguing with the QA folks. The architect was just through. He was just like raising his hands, frustrated. I mean, it was a nightmare, right? It got so bad that I actually wanted to take them to my martial arts school and allow them to take out their stress on each other, right? And I was going to referee. However, HR didn't like that, so I had to come up with something different. So what did we do? We implemented some XP-inspired practices. One of the things we like doing a lot is really talking about testing first. Instead of having the testers at the end, you bring the testers to the beginning, and you really write tests in a way that's in plain English. So that way, everyone understands. So before you hit one piece of code, before you hit a keyboard to create one piece of code, the testers are actually very involved. We call this shifting left, right? This really helped with collaboration because now the coders understood what they were going to get tested on before they actually started coding. I like to think of it as like the QA folks now become like the professor, and their job is not to find 8,000 bugs. Their job is to help the developers, just like a professor would, help them to pass the test. So that fundamental change, that just change in philosophy was help the developers pass the test by helping them understand what they're going to be tested on. Okay? And again, a lot of interventions. I had to have a lot of one-off sessions with many of the team members, and they actually began to deliver better quality and value to the customers. I remember I went on vacation. I came back. I thought everything was gonna. I was terrified to hear what happened, and I talked. And I said, "Oh yeah, things are doing good." The product owner was real happy because the customers were happy. So things started going a lot better there. All right, my third case study. This was non-IT marketing. So what happened? They had so many inordinate number of requests per week. I mean, the director came up to me and she was like, Neil, we're 150% over allocated. I was like, okay, that's not good. Um, extremely process intensive. Internal customers had very low confidence, and honestly, the personnel in that department in the marketing group had very low morale. Again, overburdened capacity. But the crazy thing is they didn't have time to change, right? We're 150% over allocated. Kind of reminded me of this, right? You see these cavemen? Hey, we're too busy. No thanks. They got the square wheels here, but they are too busy to put the round wheels on, right? Don Reinaldson, he wrote the book, The Principles of Product Development Flow. He says, we will always conclude, notice he says always, that operating a product development process near full utilization is an economic disaster. So if that's an economic disaster, running at full utilization, imagine if you're 150% utilization. I don't know what's above an economic disaster, right? A really bad disaster. Okay, so what did I do? Instead of saying, okay, instead of that, they're like, hey, we don't have time to change. So what I did is I said, okay, let me just talk to people. I'm just going to ask for 15 to 30 minutes. All right. So I did short retrospectives with a lot of the people, from the executives all the way down to, the boots on the ground. All right. Everybody said they were super busy. So I got 15, 30 minutes on their calendar. The funny thing is, as busy as those people were, that 15 minutes started becoming 30, started becoming 45, started becoming an hour. Sometimes I talked to people for an hour and a half when they all told me they were too busy, right? They were telling me about how bad things were. Okay. So we conducted a value stream mapping. We said, okay, this is what they're going to be doing. They're doing this. They had this whole gateway process, right? They had uh, we conducted internal value stream process mapping. We did gather requirements. They did their planning, execution. And then as you see below it, there were all kind of process steps below that. And below that, there were even more process steps, right? So what did we learn? Well, there were numerous layers of approvals, minimal visibility, and it caused tons of internal swirls. So even though this looked really nice and pretty, the way it actually worked in practice was more like this. It was a mess, right? And the bad thing is that each group was yelling at the other group saying it was their fault. Okay. So what happened? Well, they finally called me and said, hey, we got a project that's failing. We switched third parties right in the middle of the project. We've never worked with this third party. We are hitting this deadline. It's coming up super fast. And so what I did is I said, okay, if you want me to work on this, I need everybody in person. Again, way before COVID, I need everybody in person for a one-day workshop. It felt like speed dating. We were trying to get to know everybody, was trying to get to know each other. And by the way, I don't know what speed dating is really like. Met my wife, through mutual friends. Anyway, so point being is we got to talking and we tried to get to know each other. And the funny thing is that we got the project back on track. And we did more in that 6 to 8 hours than they were trying to do in 6 to 8 weeks, right? Of doing all these different handoffs just by getting everybody in the room. But I didn't hear from them for weeks. I was like, what the heck happened? Well, what happened was they actually created a cross-functional team on their own. They said, hey, Neil, we got you a cross-functional team. I was like, great. And so what we did is we implemented Scrum and Kanban, or Scrumban, right? We used the iterative collaborative nature of Scrum, but we also used Kanban to visualize WIP and to increase flow. And what happened was within one sprint, they accomplished more than they typically would in a couple of months, right? And the first few retrospectives were just incredible testimonies. My favorite one was this. This one girl, she said, I am so much happier now. Even my coworkers are noticing I'm in a better mood. I was really skeptical before we started because I was so burnt out. But now I have hope. I was like, I was blown away when I heard that. I was just absolutely amazed. And what started happening was they wanted to start replicating this across different business units. They're like, Neil, can you do for us what you did for marketing? I started working with operations, then I was working with product development, the business side, not the IT side. And then all of a sudden I was working with sales department. And so that's kind of how you get into quote unquote business agility. You start with the IT side, and then it starts morphing into the non-IT side. One thing I recommend for each and every person, if you're just starting out in Agile, is have a win book. Keep a record of wins. It's great for speaking to leadership. Okay, keep your record of wins. When you have testimonies, when customers start saying you're doing things better, thank you for your flexibility, etc. Keep a book of wins. All right. It's great when you have to speak to leadership, when you're trying to ask for more resources and things like that. All right. My fourth study here. I was working with an organization, very traditional organization. They wanted to implement an enterprise-wide system. They tried with a very expensive third party for nearly 2 years. They could not do it. It was a bust. So what did we do? We implemented SAFe to help with alignment and synchronization across numerous departments and suppliers. Basically, what we did was if you have like 100 people assigned to this, you create a bunch of small teams, you put them all on the same cadence, etc. They all plan together, they're working together, etc. And basically what happened, they incrementally began to deliver the system. It was amazing. After 12 weeks, after a couple sprints, people were starting to see results. And then after 12 weeks, we did a full system demo. I mean, when I say full of what we developed at that point. And I'm telling you, the executives were so excited. They were so happy. I mean, I was like, dang, this is like an HR rah-rah session or something. They were so excited, right? And bottom line was we were able to get an MVP to production within 6 months. They couldn't do it in 2 years. We were able to get them to do it within 6 months, right? And so what happened was the organization was starting to launch more agile release trains. When I went to a different assignment, they had probably close to 1,000 people on in this framework doing agile and things like that. All right. Now, another group I was working with, again, a lot of non-business teams, right? There were several non-IT, several non-IT, non-tech. They were business teams. They were interrelated. They needed to align, but they didn't need as much coordination as you would on that big digital platform I just talked about. So created some cross-functional teams that were grouped together. We used Spotify model, right? We do quarterly prioritizing and planning together, similar to SAFe. We do plan together, but it's not as much structure as SAFe would provide. So again, that's why we did Spotify. In Spotify, you organize people, but it's, again, not nearly as much structure and things like that. And we did Scrum of Scrums regularly. That's where Scrum Masters and the different teams, members of the different teams, whoever was needed, would come together and we would talk and collaborate. Very informal, not like your traditional stakeholder updates and things like that, but very informal, just to make sure we were working through dependencies and stuff like that. Again, Scrum at scale. And then the squads, that's what they call them in Spotify, are able to operate pretty autonomously, and it's becoming the model across the enterprise, right? Started out with one pretty Pretty good sized department. Now it's going all over. All right. So what am I getting at? Well, frameworks. Frameworks are wonderful. We want to have them in our toolbox, but understand that tools are merely a means to an end. What do you mean? Contrary to popular belief, being agile is not the goal. You're like, what? Wait a minute. Would you just talk to us this a whole lunch hour about agile? What do you mean being agile isn't the goal? I say it everywhere I go. I always get the same looks, and I can't see it on Zoom, but people are always like, what the heck do you mean? What are you talking about? See, the goal is not just to become agile, right? The goal is to create high performing teams that deliver value. We want to create high performing teams that deliver value. And if we can do that enough, then we can create high performing organizations that can deliver value to their customers very quickly, very efficiently, with high quality, high compliance, and really, really high customer satisfaction and employee satisfaction. Now, even within one organization, if you go from one department to another department, could be completely different set of circumstances, right? So that is why we want to be formless and shapeless like water. We want to be formless. We want to be shapeless. We want to be like water. We want to learn a broad set of skills. So that way, whether we're in a big organization and you go to different parts of the department, you can learn how to operate in that. Or if you want to go and test yourself out on the market, or if you want to look for a different opportunity, you can become more marketable by becoming more versatile, more formless, more shapeless like water. All right. Well, thank you all very much. I really appreciate that. And before I open it up for questions, I want to just offer this. I offer this everywhere I go. Just want to offer a free coaching session, whether you want to learn about agile leadership or just maximizing human potential. I can talk to you about karate, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, boxing, or whatever. All right. Whatever it is you want to do, more than happy to work with you. I just love helping people get to the next level in their journey, whatever that journey is. You can contact me here. There's my email, there's my LinkedIn. I'm about to put that in the chat. And all right, there you go. Well, thank you all very much. We've got about 10, 15 minutes here. So want to open it up for questions. Any questions, comments, or anything?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and get started, Neil. While people are thinking about their questions, people, you can put your questions into the chat window. But I've got a lot of questions, but I'll start off with last year I was doing a project and I had a poor relationship, let's say, with the tech leader, similar to one of the case studies. It was a pure remote project, so I never physically met the person. If we physically met and I was bigger than him, I would have challenged him to a fight. But
I could have been in your corner.
Yeah, there you go. But when you mentioned on one of those case studies where you have toxic team dynamics, how do you walk back from that? How do you recover?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, one of the things we say at this one organization I'm working with, first, always assume good intent, right? Just assume good intent. And then what I like to do is really try to figure out what is the source of it, what's the root cause. And one of the ways to do that is, we have this thing called retrospectives, and we can do it in a very non-threatening way. And we can just say, hey, let's talk about these problems. Now, I don't like to talk about the elephant in the room. I like to shoot the elephant in the room. All right. And let's put it out here. What's the issue? What's going on? Right? What is it? And I had to do a lot of that, and it took a lot of, like I said, interventions. My first job, my first boss told me I was great at the backdoor approach. Right? A little bit harder to do on Zoom, but you can still do it. Where instead of just doing stuff in meetings, I would grab people in the hallway. I'd see them at lunch. I would see them at the water cooler or whatever, and just, hey man, what's going on, and just kind of get to know people, just start relationship building, things like that. So for me, start with offline conversations, use things like retrospectives, stuff like that. And if it's still not getting better, then you may have to um, you may have to talk with the product owner, manager, et cetera, and really get with them. One of the biggest things that helped me was really understanding where the other person's coming from, right? They may have a reason why they do what they do, right? There was this one group I was working with in another company. They were, I mean, it was very, just be plain and honest, it was very hostile. I mean, it was just not a good situation. And then the more I talked with them and the more I learned about them, I realized it wasn't that the people themselves were bad. It was because they were being asked to do something a certain way. And I recognized, okay, it's not here that's the issue, it's up here. And so John Maxwell says everything rises and falls with leadership. It may be a leadership issue. I've had to pull vice presidents aside and say, hey, look, this isn't going to be good, right? And try to work through that. So long story short, try to deal with the individual, try to deal with them, retrospectives, things like that. And then if it's a leadership issue, then you're going to have to work your channels and, say, okay, like I had one person tell me, Neil, I understand what you're trying to do, but this is not a priority. What you're asking me is not a priority until my boss makes it a priority. Right. So that needed to work some different stratosphere. So good question though.
Yeah. The more experience that I have, the older I get, I guess, the more I've come to believe in the value of creating a psychologically safe environment. One of the Agile principles of psychologically safe environment. I'm not sure I knew what that meant, 10 or 20 years ago when I was younger, but now I think it's a key to success, period. That if you don't have a positive environment, you're not going to be successful. And I love the quote that you've got from one of your clients. I'm so much happier now.
Yeah.
To me, that would be a bigger success criteria than whatever the number of bugs or any other criteria.
Absolutely. No, you're 100% right. Google actually launched a project years ago called Project Aristotle. And what they did, Google's one of the foremost leaders in analytics in the world. And they tried to see what made the highest performing teams. And they looked at everything. They looked at technology, or they looked at technical skills, experience, education, personality types, etc. What amazed me, and now this is Google, who deals with data like crazy, right? Nobody deals with more data than Google. What they found were two things. Number one, they found high performing teams had psychological safety, which is what you're talking about, Dominic. And then number two, because of that psychological safety, everybody on the team shared the same amount. Even the introverts shared roughly the same amount. So great point there. All right. All right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, go ahead if you want to read the questions.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, several comments from the chat window. Love the quote, being agile is not the goal. Also, the Win book is a fantastic idea. I'm going to start. I had the Win book up here, but I think it's better to write it down. But several more questions. First from Don, how do you manage expectations when you first start with a group?
How do you manage? That's a great question. One of the things we like to do is have what we call a sprint zero. And that's where, you have the forming, storming, norming, et cetera, where for a couple of weeks, we call it sprint zero, where you get together, you do some team building stuff, and you lay out expectations. You come up with, okay, well, let's come up with some working agreements, right? It's as simple as, hey, how about no Zoom meetings before 7 o'clock in the morning, right? I've got little kids, et cetera. And you just kind of go through certain things, and that thing's going to constantly keep emerging. And I know team building sounds very HR warm fuzzy-ish, but that group I was talking about, where Dominic just mentioned about, that person feels like they have hope, that happened several years ago. To this day, we still remember some of the stories we shared at that team building. That's how powerful it is. If you do it right, it can really help the team get off to the right foot, right? And then, and then hopefully if you're the Scrum Master or whatever, you're constantly trying to reinforce good Agile practices, having a safe environment, things like that. So yeah, starting off on the right foot is one of the best ways. Sorry, Dominic, go ahead.
No, I agree. I like having a sprint zero. A lot of purists don't like that, but I love having a sprint zero. And then some teams create a team charter that includes things like, if I was doing it, I would start all my meetings at 7 a.m. because I'm an early bird. But obviously, when you work with a team, come up with with what works best for the team itself. Another question is, what would be the main point to focus on in a non-software project? Like Bruce Lee also did, training one good kick 1,000 times.
Yep. So one of the things that probably one of the best things that I've learned from non-software projects, a couple things. Number one, even though you may have disparate groups, like you have to deal with legal compliance, which I've had to do a lot of, you still want to say, even if you're doing a waterfall project, right? By the way, in the PMBOK, there's something called progressive elaboration, where planning is iterative, right? A lot of people don't realize that because the PMBOK's like 8,000 pages long and it's just this one little sentence. But there is something called progressive elaboration, meaning that you're constantly iterating on things. And the way I like to think of it is this: okay, even with a non-IT team, at the end of 2 weeks, what value can we deliver, right? What value can we deliver? What can we show that's of some value, of whether it's internal stakeholders or whatever? What's going to be something valuable, right? Okay, let's take a look at 6 months, a year, whatever. And then you kind of iterate through that. So even if it's non-software, and again, you may not be able to do it in 2 weeks. Like I got one group, they have 3-week sprints, whatever. Doesn't matter. Point being is focus on what value can you deliver in a given time box. That could be a month, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. Doesn't matter. And the second thing is getting everybody in the same room. One of the reasons why I told you I worked on the product side, one of the most successful things was just doing stand-ups. What do you mean? We had contract, we had legal, we had underwriting, we had all the marketing, all those folks. They met fairly regularly for like, legal's like, we don't have time, we don't have time. I said, can we borrow you for 15 minutes? Okay, we have time, right? And just being able to get those questions answered within those 15, 20 minutes, whatever it was amazing how important that was. The most basic fundamental practice you can do in Agile was like, they all stated during our product launch, which by the way, executives said was one of the most successful launches ever. Just getting that cross-functional team in the room, talking on a regular basis, more than just once every 2 weeks for status updates, was absolutely huge, powerful thing. So cross-functional teams, and then focus on value, focus on outcome, not just activity. All right.
Perfect. I want to give a warning. We have more questions than we have time. So if I don't get to some of the questions, if we run out of time here with Niel, Niel's LinkedIn information is there up on the screen. So if I don't get to your question, then just post it to Niel offline and I'm sure he'll answer it. But another question came in and I'm going to change the question a little bit just to make it harder. So I apologize in advance, Niel, for making this question harder. But what do you think is more important, communication skills or technical skills for an Agile project manager?
So I have something, I have another talk, and maybe I can come back and do it sometime, called the IT Factor for Scrum Masters and Project Managers. And I cover just that. I used to hire people more for their interpersonal skills, their initiative, things like that, more so than the technical skills, because I can train somebody, certify them in Agile, etc., but I can't really train attitude, initiative, things like that. So, ideally you have both, but for me, if I have to, all things being equal, if I look at somebody, they have more technical skill versus somebody that may not have as much technical skill, but has a lot more initiative, I usually tend to lean that way. And again, that's for like Scrum Master, Agile Project Manager, things like that. Because again, I can train them skills, but that whole attitude, gumption kind of thing, and there's studies out there that show if you're most PMs are too process focused and not outcome focused, and therefore customer satisfaction is much lower. So
yeah,
that's a whole talk. I've got a whole module on that.
We'll definitely have you come back to do that. And PMI is probably partially to blame on the focus on process versus outcome. I think they've recognized that, and I think the 7th edition of the PMBOK starts their transformation to more value-driven versus process-driven. I think we got time for one more quick question. Can we implement a hybrid Agile model other than Scrumban, picking up best practices from different frameworks or tools? If yes, how and when should we do that?
Well, again, if you read Jeff Sutherland's book, doing twice the work in half the time, that talks about Scrum. Scrum is not like a pure creation. It came from a lot of different things. He had all kind. He talks about, and I can't get into it, but there's all kind of different inspirations for that. Agile in and of itself is kind of a compilation of things. So yes, you can. How do you do it? And I'm not just saying this because I'm an Agile coach, but you do want somebody around who has a pretty good idea of frameworks, principles, values to, one, figure out what problem you're trying to solve, and then you pick which practices are going to make the most sense, right? A framework is just a collection of practices, and most martial arts styles are a collection of practices that probably came from somewhere else, right? And people just kind of collected stuff here and there. That's how we learn. So yes, you can absolutely do that too. You've got to have somebody who really has a pretty good idea of what to look for and what's good, what's bad, etc.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you said before. Being agile is not the goal. Implementing Scrum is not the goal. Implementing SAFe is not the goal. These are all just methodologies. And in fact, if you just concentrate on the framework itself, as you said earlier, that ends up almost being a prison, or it
Exactly.
constrains you versus enables you to add the most value. So with that, with 1 minute to spare, we'll wrap it up. So I want to, on behalf of PMI WDC, thank you, Niel, very much. If you send me a PDF version of the PowerPoint, Niel, I will send it out to all of the attendees, and I definitely would like to have you come back in the future. Thanks again, Niel.
All right, great, thanks. And hit me up on LinkedIn, please. Love to connect with everybody.
Sounds good. All right, thanks everybody for attending. We'll see you next